They expected millions. What they got was nothing. When country legend Glen Campbell passed away, fans assumed his children would inherit a fortune. But the shocking truth is, several of them were completely cut out of his will. The decision left family members stunned and sparked a bitter feud that still echoes through Nashville today. Here's why his kids didn't see a dime. The first reason: estrangement from some children. Over the course of his life, Glen Campbell fathered 8 children through 4 marriages. While some of those relationships remained close and loving until the end, others were marked by emotional distance, misunderstandings, and ultimately, estrangement. Nowhere was this more evident than in his relationship with 3 of his children from his second marriage to Billie Jean Nunley: William, Kelly, and Wesley. Billie Jean, Glen's second wife and the mother of these 3 children, was married to Campbell from 1959 to 1976, a significant period during the rise of his career. Their children grew up during the peak of Campbell's fame, a time when he was consumed by the demands of music, Hollywood, and, notoriously, personal demons including alcohol and drug abuse. According to those close to the family, the marriage was stormy, and the divorce deeply impacted the children. As they matured, the already strained dynamic between father and children seemed to only widen. By the time of Glen's later years, especially as he began to battle Alzheimer's disease, diagnosed in 2011, William, Kelly, and Wesley were largely absent from his life, not by chance, but by circumstance and decision. When Campbell passed away in 2017 at the age of 81, a new wound was opened for these 3 siblings. They were completely excluded from his will. The will, drafted in 2006, years before the public knew about his Alzheimer's, explicitly named and excluded William, Kelly, and Wesley. The rest of his estate was left to his wife at the time of his death, Kim Woolen, and the children they had together, Cal, Shannon, and Ashley, all of whom had been involved in Glen's final music projects and caregiving during his decline. The exclusion caused immediate controversy. Some onlookers viewed it as harsh, even vindictive, questioning whether Glen, already in the early stages of cognitive decline, had been influenced or manipulated. But those closest to Glen, including family members and legal representatives, maintained that the decision was made with full mental clarity, long before his health deteriorated. According to them, this was not a rushed or confused choice, but rather a deeply considered act, made by a man fully aware of the rifts in his life. Legal challenges were mounted by the excluded siblings, who sought to contest the will on grounds of undue influence and lack of capacity. But in 2020, the Tennessee Supreme Court declined to take up the case, effectively upholding Glen Campbell's will and his decision to leave those 3 children out of his estate. The heartbreak of this estrangement is undeniable. Glen's choice, whether seen as justified or not, serves as a stark reminder that celebrity status doesn't shield a family from emotional turmoil, fractured relationships, or the consequences of long-standing pain. In interviews over the years, Glen rarely spoke in detail about these particular children, choosing instead to focus on his music, faith, and later, the family members actively involved in his care. The second reason: a legally updated will during his battle with Alzheimer's. What many fans didn't know at the time of his death was that Campbell had quietly revised his will in 2006, a full 5 years before his public Alzheimer's diagnosis in 2011. This revision, made while Glen was still legally and medically considered of sound mind, proved to be both strategic and controversial. As mentioned, in that will, Campbell explicitly excluded 3 of his 8 children, William, Kelly, and Wesley, all born during his second marriage to Billie Jean Nunley. The decision stunned many. In a family already marked by complex dynamics, this formal exclusion added new weight to long-standing emotional wounds. While some saw the omission as harsh or punitive, others familiar with the situation insisted that Glen made the decision deliberately, with clarity and legal counsel, based on what he viewed as fractured or distant relationships with those particular children. The legal strength of the will rested on timing, because it was updated in 2006, well before Glen's cognitive decline became public knowledge. The document was considered valid and binding. Courts generally uphold wills written by individuals presumed to be mentally competent, and in Glen's case, no credible medical evidence was presented to suggest otherwise at the time of the update. His Alzheimer's diagnosis wouldn't come until 5 years later, and even then, the condition progresses gradually, often leaving patients lucid for stretches in its early stages. As Glen's condition worsened, his wife Kim Campbell and their 3 children, Cal, Shannon, and Ashley, took on the roles of caretakers, collaborators, and companions. His final tour, captured in the emotional 2014 documentary I'll Be Me, showcased not only Glen's courage in facing a devastating illness, but also the devotion of his wife and younger children as they supported him on stage and off. Daughter Ashley, a musician herself, became a visible presence in his later years, helping Glen perform when his memory began to fade. Given that context, Glen's decision to leave the bulk of his estate to Kim and their 3 children made more sense to those close to him. He was choosing to honor the people actively involved in his care and day-to-day life, and some believe the revision reflected his attempt to preserve peace and simplicity in a painful final chapter. However, William, Kelly, and Wesley were not willing to let the matter go unchallenged. They attempted to contest the will in court, arguing that Glen had been under undue influence and lacked the capacity to make such a pivotal decision. But their legal arguments failed to gain traction. In 2020, after years of legal wrangling, the Tennessee Supreme Court declined to hear the case, effectively bringing the dispute to a close and upholding the legitimacy of the 2006 will. The third reason: protection of the estate and caregiving rewards. In the final years of his life, Glen's wife, Kim Campbell, became more than just a spouse. She was his caregiver, decision-maker, emotional anchor, and protector. Married since 1982, Kim stood by Glen through his struggles with addiction, the challenges of touring, and eventually, the heartbreaking progression of Alzheimer's. It was a task that demanded unimaginable strength. As the disease slowly erased pieces of the man the world once knew, Kim remained fiercely devoted, not only overseeing his medical care, but also ensuring that Glen retained as much dignity, purpose, and comfort as possible. Kim's commitment wasn't a solitary endeavor. The couple's 3 children, Cal, Shannon, and Ashley, also played vital roles in Glen's final chapter. Most notably, Ashley, a talented musician, joined her father on his farewell tour and became one of his closest companions. During moments when Glen's memory would fail him on stage, Ashley would step in gently with musical or verbal cues, keeping the performance on track and his spirits intact. Their bond was clear and deeply moving, captured poignantly in the 2014 documentary Glen Campbell, I'll Be Me. This tight-knit unit, Kim and the 3 children they shared, became the inner circle of Glen's life. And when it came time to plan for the future, many believe that Glen wanted to ensure his gratitude was reflected in concrete terms. Though the will that excluded 3 of his older children, William, Kelly, and Wesley, was actually written in 2006, well before his Alzheimer's diagnosis became public, the motivations behind that decision came sharply into focus during his decline. Those close to the family say that Glen's decision wasn't born of spite, but rather of recognition. He chose to leave the bulk of his estate to those who stood by him when he was most vulnerable, not simply to those who shared his DNA. His will became, in effect, a reward for loyalty and presence, a way of saying thank you to the ones who walked with him through the darkness. Supporters of Kim and her children argued that inheritance, especially under such difficult circumstances, shouldn't be viewed as an automatic right based on bloodline, but as a reflection of love, sacrifice, and care. They were the ones at his bedside, the ones lifting him through the hardest moments, while others, though biologically connected, were distant or disengaged from his daily life. In that sense, Glen's will became a statement, not just a division of assets, but a declaration of who truly stood with him when it mattered most. The fourth reason: alleged legal disputes and family tensions. And even before Glen Campbell took his final bow in 2017, after a long battle with Alzheimer's, storm clouds had already gathered over the family. As the country music legend's health declined, so too did the peace within his household. What should have been a time of family unity turned into a bitter chapter marked by deep fractures, legal battles, and emotional wounds that never fully healed. The tensions stemmed largely from the divide between Campbell's fourth wife, Kim Campbell, and some of his older children from previous marriages. These included Debbie Campbell and Travis Campbell, Glen's children with his second wife, Billie Jean Nunley. Reports indicate that while Glen was living in a care facility during the final stages of his illness, certain family members felt shut out. They claimed that Kim was restricting their access to their father, preventing them from spending meaningful time with him during his most vulnerable moments. In 2015, long before Glen's death, these tensions spilled into the courtroom. Travis and Debbie filed a petition under Tennessee's elder abuse law, seeking expanded visitation rights. They alleged that Kim was intentionally isolating Glen from his children, friends, and extended family. The legal move thrust private family pain into the public eye and hinted at much deeper interpersonal rifts. Though the court eventually ruled that Glen's children had a legal right to visit him, the damage to familial relationships had already been done. These public legal battles intensified the hostility between Kim and Glen's older children, creating a cold divide that seemed irreparable. For Kim, some viewed her actions as protective, a wife guarding her husband's health and privacy during a devastating illness. But for the children left outside the gates of Glen's care facility, it felt like exile from their father's final chapter. By the time Glen passed away in August 2017, the wounds hadn't healed, and the aftermath only deepened the scars. When his will was made public, it shocked many. Glen had explicitly excluded Travis, Debbie, and one other older child from inheriting any portion of his estimated $50 million estate. The will, which had been signed in 2006, long before his Alzheimer's diagnosis, made it clear that Glen had already decided which of his children would be beneficiaries and which would not. The fifth reason: Glen's desire to avoid splitting the estate. Too thin. As mentioned, in the aftermath of Glen Campbell's death in 2017, much attention was placed on the emotional fallout from his decision to exclude 3 of his 8 children from his will. Yet beyond the obvious personal tensions lay another layer, one rooted in financial strategy, estate planning, and hard-earned life lessons from decades in the volatile world of music. Though Glen was a beloved icon and a successful recording artist with hits like Rhinestone Cowboy and Wichita Lineman, he was no stranger to financial uncertainty. His career had soared and dipped over the decades, and like many artists of his era, he faced the complexity of managing wealth in an unpredictable industry. Campbell made and lost fortunes, battled addiction, and weathered the cost of multiple divorces. By the time he approached the final phase of his life, he had learned, perhaps the hard way, that financial stability required careful management and foresight. When Glen's estate planning documents were revealed, one thing became clear: this was not merely a personal statement, but also a practical financial decision. Despite reports that his fortune was worth between $50 million and $100 million at the time of his passing, that number can be misleading. The figure likely included intellectual property rights, real estate, music royalties, and business holdings, all of which require long-term management, legal oversight, and in many cases, liquid capital to maintain. Dividing such an estate evenly among 8 children and a surviving spouse would significantly reduce the individual inheritance amounts. While this may sound fair in theory, Glen may have viewed it differently. Spreading the wealth too thin could result in each heir receiving a modest slice rather than a meaningful share, one that could offer security, opportunity, or a legacy. And Glen, ever the realist, likely understood the risks of fragmentation. Estates of similar size have often been drained by legal fees, management disputes, and infighting among heirs. By narrowing the list of beneficiaries, ultimately leaving most of the estate to his wife Kim Campbell and their 3 children together, Glen made what appears to be a calculated move to concentrate his resources within his immediate household. Kim, who had been his caretaker during his Alzheimer's battle and the stabilizing figure in his final years, was placed in a position of both emotional and financial trust. Their children, much younger than Glen's other kids, were still building their adult lives. Ensuring their future, especially in an increasingly expensive world, may have felt more urgent than dividing the wealth among older children who had long since begun their own independent paths. This kind of estate planning is not uncommon among celebrities or individuals with blended families, particularly when assets are difficult to divide cleanly. By excluding 3 of his children from previous relationships, Glen avoided the administrative and legal complexities that can arise when a large number of heirs are involved, particularly in families where past grievances exist. Fewer beneficiaries meant fewer points of legal contention, potentially reducing the risk of the estate being tied up in years of costly probate battles. What do you think about the reasons why Glen Campbell's children did not inherit his multi-million-dollar fortune? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.